Have you ever pondered over the term grace? How easily it's misunderstood in today's world? Let's take a moment to unpack this. Many people today seem to hold the belief that grace somehow cancels out the need for law or moral obligations. It's as if grace has become an excuse for lawlessness, a get-out-of-jail-free card that absolves us from any adherence to moral standards. But is this really what grace is about? Surely grace is not a free pass to live without boundaries, without rules, without consequences. This misconception is not only dangerous, it's a distortion of the true nature of grace. It risks promoting a disregard for moral standards, a laissez-faire attitude towards lawlessness, and a skewed understanding of what grace truly is. So, Ian, it seems grace isn't as simple as it sounds, right? But what does the Bible say about grace? Dive into the biblical understanding of grace and you'll find a different story. Grace in the biblical context is a term synonymous with God's unmerited favor. It is His benevolence to the undeserving. Yet it's necessary to emphasize that grace does not exist in a void. It does not stand in opposition to law, but rather it coexists with it. Picture grace and law as two sides of the same divine coin. The law, God's moral code, outlines our obligations. It's like a compass pointing us towards righteous living. Yet it acknowledges our human limitations, our tendency to falter and stray. And that's where grace steps in. Grace is God's response to our human fallibility. It's His mercy, His forgiveness extended to those who have erred, who've strayed from the path outlined by the law. The Apostle Paul, in his letter to the Romans, says, "Where sin increased, grace abounded all the more." That's not a dismissal of the law. Rather, it's an affirmation of the law's role in making us realize our shortcomings and our need for God's grace. Consider the parable of the prodigal son, a story of transgression, repentance, and forgiveness. The prodigal son, after squandering his inheritance, realizes his mistake and returns to his father, who welcomes him with open arms. The father's forgiveness doesn't negate the son's wrongdoing. Instead, it highlights the gravity of the son's mistakes and the depth of the father's love and grace. This understanding of grace underscores that it doesn't eliminate the need for adherence to the law. Grace is not a divine loophole, a free pass to live without regard to God's commands. Instead, it's a divine pardon, a compassionate response to our human tendency to err. Grace doesn't encourage lawlessness. Instead, it emphasizes our need for the law, our need to strive for righteousness, even as we acknowledge our propensity to fall short. It's a balance, a harmonious interplay between divine expectation and divine compassion. So grace isn't a free pass to disobey laws, but a divine pardon for those who have faltered. It's a balance, not an eradication of law. Why does this matter? Why should we care about the correct understanding of grace, you might ask? Well, let's get into it. The importance of understanding grace correctly cannot be overstated. Misconceptions can lead to a dangerous notion that grace somehow gives us a free pass to live without regard for moral standards, promoting lawlessness. But that's not what grace is about. Grace is not a dismissal of the law, but a loving provision for those times when we fall short. It doesn't nullify our responsibility to strive for righteousness. On the contrary, grace should inspire us to live in faithful conformity to God's directives. It should motivate us to be better, to do better, not out of fear of punishment, but out of love and gratitude for the mercy we've been shown. Think of grace as a safety net, not an excuse to perform reckless acrobatics. It's there to catch us when we stumble, not to encourage us to throw ourselves off the tightrope. Misunderstanding this can lead to a skewed spiritual balance, tipping us towards a life that is anything but faithful. A correct understanding of grace, then, is crucial for a balanced, faithful life. Let's recap what we've learned about grace. We started by addressing the common misconceptions of grace that have been circulating in our society. We've debunked the notion that grace replaces the law, recognizing instead that it operates alongside it. Grace doesn't give us a free pass to violate moral obligations, but rather, it provides forgiveness when we falter. We then delved into the biblical perspective of grace. We found that grace and law are not adversaries, but companions. They work together to guide us in our journey of faith, helping us to navigate the challenges of life while keeping us accountable to God's directives. Moving on, we emphasize the importance of having a correct understanding of grace. Misinterpretations can lead to a dangerous disregard for God's laws, but a sound comprehension of grace can help us live a life of faithful obedience, always striving to align our actions with his teachings. And now we've arrived at the end of our journey. Remember, grace isn't about disregarding the law, but about forgiveness and balance. Thanks for joining us on this journey of understanding grace.